On the night of September 12, 2025, under a pale moon, the Primorske oil terminal on the Baltic coast was a picture of industrial calm. Two massive tankers, part of the so-called Shadow Fleet, were moored at the pier, their hulls filled with oil bound for markets that prefer to stay off the official record. But far to the south, the quiet was about to be shattered. In a Russian command center, a technician stared at his console. A strange anomaly was blooming on his long-range radar screen. Over 70 faint, fast signals, all converging on Russian airspace. They had small radar signatures, long ranges, and the potential to carry destructive payloads. Within minutes, air raid sirens wailed across Leningrad Oblast. Russia's formidable, layered air defense network, the S-400s, the BUKs, the Pantsers roared to life, their systems hunting for targets in the dark. What was about to happen wasn't just another attack. It was a masterclass in modern deception and asymmetric warfare, a plan hatched months earlier in a dimly lit room in Kyiv. Ukrainian engineers and tacticians, faced with the seemingly impossible task of striking a heavily defended target nearly 1,000 kilometers away, had come up with a brilliant plan. They decided not to try and outgun the Russians, but to outthink them. They would build an illusion so convincing that the defenders would waste their most powerful weapons on the wrong targets. The concept was simple, but its execution was incredibly complex. Saturate the defenses, deceive the operators, and then land a few precise, surgical strikes. To do this, a swarm of over 70 drones was prepared. The first wave consisted of 35 AQ-400 scythe drones. These were essentially cheap, plywood decoys, designed to fly low and slow, directly toward St. Petersburg. They were the bait, easy targets meant to draw the fire of Russia's most advanced air defense systems. The real threat was a second, more sophisticated force of about 40 drones. This group included 15 UJ-26 bomber drones. Modified for extended range, they carried 40-kilogram warheads and enough fuel for a one-way trip of 1,000 kilometers. Flying alongside them were specialized Banshee 7 inches electronic warfare platforms. These drones were stripped of explosives and packed with powerful jamming pods designed to blind Russian tracking radars at the most critical moments. Every single piece of this aerial armada, from the plywood decoys to the kamikaze drones, had one job: to manipulate the attention and decisions of the defenders. At midnight, the swarm lifted off from secret launch sites inside Ukraine. They immediately dropped low, hugging river valleys and forested ridges, using preloaded terrain maps to stay below the main radar horizon. This was the most perilous part of their journey: hours of autonomous flight, where any mechanical failure or crash could mean the end. Several drones were lost along the way. These losses were anticipated and accepted. What truly mattered was that enough of them made it through to create the illusion they had planned. When the first wave was finally detected by Russia's powerful Big Bird long-range radar array, the Russian command system did exactly what the Ukrainians had predicted. They saw a large group of signals heading for St. Petersburg and identified it as the main threat. S-400 missiles, some of the most advanced in the world, streaked into the night sky, hunting down and destroying the cheap plywood decoys one by one. From the Russian perspective, it looked like a successful defense, a textbook interception of a mass drone attack. But for the attackers, it was just the opening move, a sacrificial play to clear the board for the real attack. While the S-400s were busy with the decoys, the other drones were engaged in a deadly cat-and-mouse game with the shorter-range Pantsir and Buk batteries scattered across the region. This is where the Banshee electronic warfare drones proved their worth. As a Pantsir system locked onto a low-flying bomber drone, a nearby Banshee detected its radar signal. In that split second, it blasted the Russian radar with a powerful, precisely timed burst of electronic interference. The Pantsir operator's screen went white. The lock was broken, and the bomber drone slipped through the curtain of fire, disappearing back into the darkness. These weren't just lucky breaks. They were carefully orchestrated moments, windows of opportunity created by electronic warfare that the physical defenses couldn't close. By dawn, the Russians had shot down dozens of drones. Official reports would proudly announce the repulsion of a massive enemy attack. But the cost of these victories was exactly what the Ukrainians had gambled on: A chaotic, noisy battlefield that hid the true, surgical threats. And out of that chaos, a small, lethal group emerged. 7 specially modified bomber drones had slipped through the main defense lines. It was 4:45 a.m. when the Primorsk terminal's own local Pantsir battery sounded the alarm. 7 tiny blips were racing towards them on the screen. The battery fired a frantic volley of missiles, but the targets were too low, too fast, and too close. In a final, disciplined maneuver, the 7 drones split into 2 groups. 3 dived for the port's critical pumping station. 1 was intercepted just a few hundred meters short, but the other 2 hit their marks perfectly. 1 slammed into the main control building, its thermobaric warhead consuming the oxygen and blowing the walls outward. A second blast tore through a pipeline manifold, severing the port's lifelines. The other 4 drones targeted the tankers at the loading pier. 2 struck the Kapitan Lob, 1 hitting the bridge and crippling its electronics, the other piercing a cargo tank and igniting a massive fire. The Sergei Gorskov was hit in its engine room and loading manifolds. 2 other Shadow Fleet tankers, the Kusto and Kailan, were also struck, pierced, and set ablaze. These weren't just random ships. They were key nodes in Russia's sanctioned oil export chain. Within seconds, the Primorsk terminal was an inferno. The pumping station collapsed. Control systems failed. Loading arms were severed, and burning oil poured into the sea. Satellite images taken later would show 2 enormous tankers burning fiercely at the pier, surrounded by a devastated terminal. The economic damage would be measured in the billions. Primorsk, a gateway for roughly 20% of Russia's seaborne oil exports, had been hit where it would hurt the most: its revenue and logistics. A port that moves 1 million barrels a day generates tens of millions of dollars in daily income. By disrupting this single node, the attack sent ripples through global markets, insurance registries, and the financial systems that fund the war. This operation demonstrated a powerful principle: economy of effect. Relatively inexpensive drones, when used with intelligence, deception, and electronic warfare, can inflict outsized strategic costs on a much larger, more powerful adversary. When the smoke cleared, official Russian media spoke of hundreds of downed drones and heroic air defenses. But the truth of modern warfare is often found in what doesn't show up on the radar. It's written in the masked approach, the momentary blanking of a screen, the tiny window of opportunity that allows a small warhead to find a vital target. That night, Ukraine used range, timing, and cognitive overload to turn a heavily defended fortress into a vulnerable target. Primorsk burned not because it was undefended, but because it was out. In this new era of drone-driven conflict, victory no longer depends solely on the cost of the weapon, but on the cunning of the plan. The flames on the Baltic were a stark reminder that the map of power can be redrawn not just by the biggest armies, but by the smartest game. The world is learning that intelligence, timing, and deception can turn modest tools into instruments of immense strategic effect. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis interesting, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the changing face of modern conflict. We'll see you in the next one.